On a bitterly cold autumn night, when frost glimmered on fallen leaves and the moon hung low in the velvet sky, a shadow stirred at the edge of the Harrison family's backyard. It wasn't the wind rustling through the maple trees, but something else, something alive and desperate. A small, bedraggled cat emerged from the darkness, each step a painful effort as she limped across the moonlit grass. Her once sleek fur hung in matted clumps, her frame painfully thin beneath it. One paw barely touched the ground as she moved, her emerald eyes reflecting both wariness and a flicker of desperate hope. From their kitchen window, young Emma Harrison spotted the mysterious visitor first. "Dad, look," she whispered, fogging the glass with her breath. The family gathered, transfixed by the sight of the feline stranger, who seemed to have materialized from nowhere. The cat froze, sensing their gaze. She retreated to the shadows beneath the old oak tree, her eyes never leaving the warm glow of the house. There was something in those eyes, not just hunger or pain, but a strange intelligence that seemed almost human in its intensity. "She needs help," Emma pleaded, but her father placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Let's not frighten her away," he advised, reaching for a bowl from the cupboard. They filled it with leftover tuna and placed it at the edge of their patio, retreating inside to watch from behind the curtains. For long minutes, nothing moved in the yard. Then, like a spirit materializing from the darkness, the cat emerged. She approached the bowl with caution that spoke of past betrayals, each step measured and ready for retreat. When she finally reached the food, she devoured it with a hunger that was heartbreaking to witness, her small body trembling with either cold or relief. As quickly as she had appeared, she vanished back into the shadows when the bowl was empty, a ghost cat melting into the night, leaving the family wondering if she would ever return, and what secret she carried in her wary, knowing eyes. Night after night, as darkness draped itself across the suburban landscape, the mysterious feline visitor returned to the Harrison family's yard, appearing like clockwork when the neighborhood fell silent. They began to watch for her, this ghost-like creature who materialized from the shadows precisely as the old grandfather clock in their hallway chimed 9. "She's back," Emma would whisper, her breath creating misty patterns on the cold window pane. The family gathered, transfixed by this ritual that had become both heartwarming and heartbreaking to witness. But something was changing. With each appearance, the cat's condition seemed to worsen. Fresh scratches marred her once beautiful face, tiny crescents of red against her silver-gray fur. Her right hind leg, already weak before, now barely supported her weight as she limped across their yard, her path illuminated only by the pale moonlight, filtering through bare autumn branches. "Look at her fur," Mrs. Harrison murmured one evening, her voice tight with concern. What had once been merely unkempt was now horrifically matted, clumps of dirt, and what appeared to be dried blood tangled in the once sleek coat. "Something terrible is happening to her." They left out better food, specially purchased cat treats, small portions of cooked chicken, and a makeshift shelter fashioned from an old storage box lined with soft blankets. The cat accepted their offerings but always maintained her distance, watching them with eyes that held both longing and terror. "Why won't she stay? Why does she keep going back to whatever's hurting her?" Emma asked, her young face pressed against the glass as they watched the cat painfully devour her meal before limping back into the darkness beyond their fence. Mr. Harrison placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Some creatures carry wounds we can't see," he said softly. "Whatever she's running from, or to, must be powerful." As they watched her disappear once more into the night, the family couldn't help but wonder what untold story this broken creature carried within her, and whether they would ever earn enough trust to hear it. The Harrison family embarked on a delicate dance of patience and compassion. Night after night, they ventured further into their yard, sitting cross-legged on the cold ground, their movements slow and deliberate as they placed the silver food bowl ever closer to their patio chairs. The cat watched them with eyes that gleamed like polished jade in the twilight, suspicious, calculating, yet somehow drawn to their unwavering kindness. Emma, barely breathing with anticipation, would sit perfectly still as the mysterious feline crept forward to eat, the distance between them shrinking by mere inches each evening. "She's measuring us," Mr. Harrison whispered one night, his voice barely audible over the gentle rustle of wind through dying leaves. testing whether we're worthy of her trust. On the 19th evening of their vigil, as the first flakes of early snow drifted lazily from a charcoal sky, something miraculous happened. The cat approached while Emma sat alone, her small hand extended palm up on the ground, a peace offering in the growing darkness. For the first time, the mysterious visitor didn't retreat when Emma shifted slightly. Instead, she crept forward until she was close enough that the child could feel the warmth of her breath. "She's so beautiful," Emma murmured as her parents watched breathlessly from the doorway. Slowly, with a trembling hand, she reached toward the cat's matted fur. The reaction was instantaneous and heartbreaking. The cat recoiled violently, her back arching in terror, eyes wide with a primal fear that transcended mere animal caution. She skittered backward, favoring her injured leg, a piercing cry escaping her throat, not of anger, but of profound, deep-seated trauma. "Oh, sweetheart," Mrs. Harrison whispered, tears welling in her eyes as she knelt beside her disappointed daughter. "This isn't about us. Someone has hurt her terribly." They watched in solemn silence as the cat retreated to the edge of their yard, trembling visibly beneath the porch light. The family exchanged knowing glances, a wordless understanding passing between them. This wasn't just a stray seeking shelter. This was a survivor carrying invisible scars from a past too painful to forget. It arrived without warning, a tempest of biblical proportions that transformed the quiet suburban neighborhood into a chaotic battleground between earth and sky. Lightning split the darkness like jagged daggers. Thunder shook the very foundations of the Harrison home, and rain fell not in drops, but in sheets of frigid water that turned their once peaceful backyard into a shallow, treacherous lake. "The cat won't come tonight," Mr. Harrison said with certainty as he secured the windows against the howling wind. No creature would brave this storm. But at precisely 9 o'clock, as if bound by some unbreakable covenant, a small shadow appeared at their back door. The family gasped in unison as they spotted her through the rain-lashed glass, their mysterious feline visitor, more apparition than animal, her body so thoroughly drenched that she appeared half her normal size. "Oh my God," Mrs. Harrison whispered, hand flying to her mouth. The cat's injured leg no longer supported her at all. Instead, it dragged uselessly behind her like a broken branch as she struggled through the rising water. Her eyes, once bright with caution, now dulled with a resignation that spoke of surrender. Emma was already moving, grabbing the softest towel from the linen closet. "We can't leave her out there," she pleaded, though no one disagreed. This was the moment where hesitation would become cruelty. With gentle movements born of weeks of patience, Mr. Harrison opened the door and stepped into the deluge. The cat made no attempt to flee, whether from trust or simple exhaustion, they couldn't tell. With hands that trembled not from cold, but from the weight of responsibility, he wrapped the soaking creature in Emma's waiting towel. For one breathless moment, they expected resistance, a final desperate bid for freedom. Instead, a sound emerged from the bundle that broke their hearts. A soft, surrendering sigh as the cat's rigid body finally yielded to their care. "Bring her to the fire," Mrs. Harrison directed, already preparing a warm bed of blankets in their hearth's glow. As they carried their fragile charge across the threshold, they understood with perfect clarity that nothing would ever be the same again. In the golden warmth of the Harrison family living room, the rescued feline remained a creature of shadows. She had chosen the farthest corner, wedged between an antique bookcase and the wall, her emerald eyes reflecting the firelight like distant beacons in a stormy sea. Though no longer fighting against her newfound sanctuary, her body remained coiled tight as a spring, ready to flee at the slightest provocation. "She's like a wild thing," Mrs. Harrison whispered, kneeling at a respectful distance. Wild, yet somehow not entirely unfamiliar with kindness. Indeed, there was something in the cat's demeanor, a flicker of recognition when gentle words were spoken, a momentary softening when Emma's innocent voice filled the room, that suggested this creature had once known human compassion before the world had turned cruel. They approached her sanctuary with reverence, as one might approach a sacred shrine. First came offerings of food, not in cold metal bowls, but in delicate saucers warmed to take the chill from her bones, tuna mixed with broth, small pieces of poached chicken, a splash of cream. The family watched in breathless silence as hunger finally overcame caution, and the cat crept forward to eat. "That's it," Emma encouraged, her voice barely audible. "No one will hurt you here." Next came the softest blanket in the house, scented with lavender and warmed by the fire. Mr. Harrison placed it nearby without expectation, an invitation rather than a demand. Hours passed as the family went about their evening routines in hushed tones, pretending not to notice as the cat gradually extended one paw to test the blanket's softness. Near midnight, as the storm continued its assault outside, Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, reading aloud from her favorite book. The words flowed like a gentle stream, tales of adventure and homecoming, of being lost and then found. Without warning, the cat emerged from her corner and settled at the very edge of the blanket, still watchful, yet somehow different. Then it happened. A sound so soft they almost missed it beneath the pattering rain, a rusty, halting purr that broke through the silence like the first birdsong after winter. A fragile thread of trust spun in the quiet sanctuary they had created together. Dawn broke with gentle fingers of light pushing through the storm clouds, as if nature itself was offering a tentative peace. The Harrison family moved with quiet determination, preparing for the journey that could no longer wait. Their newfound companion, still wary, but no longer fighting their touch, was gently placed in a carrier lined with the blanket that had become her first comfort. "It'll be all right," Emma whispered, her face pressed close to the carrier door. "Dr. Miller will help you feel better." Though the words were meant for the cat, they seemed to steady the entire family as they drove through puddle-strewn streets to the only veterinary clinic in town. The waiting room was mercifully empty as they entered, the cat's frightened eyes peering out from the safety of her temporary sanctuary. Dr. Miller, a woman whose silver-streaked hair and kind eyes spoke of decades of compassion for the voiceless, greeted them with a gentle smile that faltered when she peered into the carrier. "Let's see what we have here," she murmured, her experienced hands carefully lifting the trembling creature onto the examination table. What followed was a silence so profound it seemed to swallow all sound. The veterinarian's fingers moved methodically through matted fur, revealing a landscape of suffering that had been hidden from view. Old scars crisscrossed beneath the soft gray coat like a terrible map of past cruelties. "These weren't accidents," Dr. Miller finally said, her voice tight with professional restraint. "Someone did this deliberately." The injured leg, when examined, revealed the unmistakable pattern of metal teeth, a trap, perhaps, or some equally sinister device. But it was when Dr. Miller gently felt along the cat's abdomen that her expression transformed from concern to heartbreak. "She's recently nursed kittens," she announced, looking up to meet the stunned gazes of the Harrison family. "Not more than 2 or 3 weeks ago." The words fell like stones in still water, rippling through the small examination room. Emma's small hand flew to her mouth, her eyes suddenly brimming with tears. "That's why she always left," Mr. Harrison whispered, realization dawning on his face. "She wasn't just a stray. She's a mother, desperately trying to return to her babies each night." In the sudden, heavy silence that followed, the cat's emerald eyes seemed to hold a new question, not of trust, but of desperate maternal pleading that transcended all barriers between species. As rain began to fall once more upon the veterinary clinic's roof, a terrible clarity descended upon the Harrison family. The mysterious comings and goings, the refusal to stay despite her worsening injuries, the precise timing of her nightly appearances, all of it suddenly coalesced into a heart-wrenching truth that stole their breath away. "She wasn't just seeking shelter," Mrs. Harrison whispered, her fingers gently stroking the cat's trembling form. "She was gathering strength to return to them, every single night." The veterinarian nodded solemnly. Mother cats will endure almost unimaginable suffering to protect their young. The fact that she would leave them at all suggests she was desperate for food, desperate enough to risk everything on the kindness of strangers. Emma's tear-streaked face transformed as determination replaced despair. "They are waiting for her," she said, her voice suddenly strong beyond her years. "Her babies are out there right now, wondering why their mother hasn't returned." Mr. Harrison knelt beside the examination table, his eyes meeting the emerald gaze of the cat who had suffered so much. In those depths, he He saw not just pain, but a fierce primal love that transcended species. The universal devotion of a mother willing to sacrifice everything for her children. How long could they survive without her? He asked, already reaching for his coat. Kittens this young? Dr. Miller's expression darkened. In this weather? Without food or their mother's warmth? Hours, maybe. Not days. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft ticking of the wall clock, each second a reminder of tiny lives hanging in the balance. We need to go now, Mrs. Harrison said, already gathering their belongings. If we follow the path she takes each night. She's been trying to show us all along, Emma interrupted, an epiphany lighting her young face. Every night, she went back the same way, past the old Anderson property, toward the abandoned factory. As they carefully returned the mother cat to her carrier, her eyes never left their faces, as if she somehow understood that these humans had finally decoded her desperate message. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest of urgency that now drove the family forward into the unknown, racing against time itself to complete a rescue that had only just begun. The storm had transformed the neighborhood into an alien landscape, familiar streets now flowing with muddy rivulets, fallen branches creating natural barriers where none had existed before. Yet the Harrison family pressed forward with singular purpose, their raincoats offering little protection against the elements that seemed determined to thwart their mission. This is the way she always went, Emma insisted, pointing toward the narrow gap in the fence that separated their manicured suburb from the industrial wasteland beyond. Her small flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating paw prints in the mud that might have gone unnoticed by less determined eyes. The mother cat watched from her carrier, her emerald gaze intense, as if willing them to understand the unspoken language of her daily journey. When they hesitated at a fork in the path, her soft meow seemed to guide them leftward, toward the skeletal remains of what had once been the town's manufacturing district. There, Mr. Harrison whispered, his voice nearly lost in the wind as he pointed toward a dilapidated structure at the edge of a vast construction site. Not quite a building, not quite a shed, a forgotten remnant of some prior purpose, its weathered boards creating a precarious shelter against the elements. The family exchanged glances heavy with both hope and dread. What would they find inside? Had they come too late? Mrs. Harrison took the lead, her maternal instinct propelling her forward across the rain-slick ground. "Hello?" she called softly as they approached the tilting doorway. "Is anyone—" Her words died in her throat as a sound emerged from within the darkness, so faint it might have been imagined, yet unmistakable to their straining ears. A chorus of tiny voices, barely more than whispers, rising and falling in desperate harmony. Emma clutched her father's hand. "Daddy," she breathed, "they're alive." The mother cat's reaction was immediate and profound. From her secure carrier, she unleashed a sound unlike any they had heard before, part call, part plea, part promise, a primal communication to the vulnerable lives that had been waiting in darkness for her return. As they approached the entrance to the ramshackle shelter, flashlight beams revealing glimpses of movement within, the family understood they stood on the threshold of something both heartbreaking and miraculous, a test of faith rewarded in the most fragile form imaginable. The abandoned shed loomed before them like a forgotten temple, its weathered boards creaking in ominous welcome as the Harrison family stepped across the threshold. Their flashlight beams danced across the debris-strewn floor, discarded construction materials, waterlogged cardboard, and the accumulated detritus of human neglect. "Stay close," Mr. Harrison cautioned, navigating around a fallen beam that partially blocked their path. The mother cat in the carrier had grown increasingly vocal, her cries taking on a desperate, pleading quality that needed no translation. Emma's flashlight caught a flicker of movement in the farthest corner, where a makeshift nest had been painstakingly constructed from scraps of insulation and tattered fabric. What they saw there stole the breath from their lungs. 5 tiny forms lay huddled together, their miniature bodies intertwined in a desperate bid for warmth that was rapidly failing them. Their fur, still baby-soft and barely developed, was slick with dampness from the leaking roof. Most alarming was their stillness, broken only by the faintest rise and fall of their fragile rib cages. "They're freezing," Mrs. Harrison whispered, already shrugging off her jacket. "Quick, Emma, Bring the carrier closer so their mother can see them." The effect was immediate and heartbreaking. At the sight of her kittens, the mother cat unleashed a sound of such profound emotion that it seemed to transcend the boundaries between human and animal understanding. She pressed herself against the carrier door, paws reaching through the gaps as if trying to bridge the impossible distance. "We don't have much time," Mr. Harrison said, his voice tight with urgency as he gently lifted the first kitten, a tiny tabby no larger than his palm. The kitten's body was frighteningly cold, its tiny pink mouth opening in a silent cry. One by one, they carefully transferred the kittens into the warmth of Mrs. Harrison's jacket, forming a makeshift incubator against the storm. The smallest one, a gray shadow of its mother, barely responded to their touch, a silent testament to how close they had come to tragedy. "Hold them close to your body heat," Dr. Miller had instructed over the phone. "Don't stop for anything. Bring them straight home." As they navigated back through the storm, precious cargo clutched against their hearts. The family moved with the focused determination of those who understood that every second now was a battle between life and death, a race against time that they refused to lose. In the golden sanctuary of the Harrison living room, a miracle unfolded beneath the warm glow of table lamps. The makeshift nest they had created, a laundry basket lined with heated blankets and surrounded by hot water bottles, had become the center of their world. Inside, 5 tiny creatures hovered at the threshold between life and death, their breaths coming in shallow whispers that seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. The mother cat, until now confined to her carrier for her own recovery, watched with an intensity that seemed to burn through the plastic mesh of her temporary prison. Her emerald eyes never left the basket, her body tense with an emotion too profound for human comprehension. "I think it's time, Doctor," Miller said softly, having arrived minutes after their return. With gentle hands, she unlatched the carrier door, stepping back to allow what would happen next to unfold without interference. For one breathless moment, nothing moved. Then, like water finding its inevitable path to the sea, the mother cat emerged. Her injuries seemed forgotten, her weakness transformed into purpose as she approached the basket with deliberate steps that spoke of both caution and desperate hope. The sound she made upon seeing her kittens, truly seeing them in the light, alive and waiting, was unlike anything the family had ever heard. Not quite a purr, not quite a cry, but something ancient and sacred that existed in the space between, a sound of homecoming. She reached the edge of the basket and, with infinite tenderness, lifted herself over its rim. One by one, she touched each kitten with her nose, her rough tongue bathing their tiny faces as if washing away the memory of separation. Each baby responded in kind, their miniature bodies wiggling toward her familiar scent, their needle-like claws kneading instinctively at her presence. Emma watched through tear-filled eyes as the mother settled herself around her brood, her body curving into a perfect crescent that embraced every small life. The kittens found their way to her warmth, to nourishment, to the heartbeat they had been missing. "We did it," Mrs. Harrison whispered, her hand finding her husband's in the quiet reverence of the moment. "We saved them all." In that sacred space between tragedy and miracle, 6 lives that might have been lost to storm and cruelty had instead found their way home, not just to safety, but to a family that had been waiting for them all along. In the gentle rhythm of passing days, life bloomed anew within the walls of the Harrison home. The corner of the living room, once simply a quiet reading nook, had transformed into a sacred space of healing and rebirth. Here, beneath the soft glow of a lamp kept perpetually lit, a once broken family of felines found their strength returning with each sunrise. The kittens, so perilously close to fading when discovered, now tumbled over one another in playful exploration of their safe haven. Their tiny bodies, once cold and still, now vibrated with the unmistakable energy of youth reclaimed. Each morning revealed new milestones, eyes opening wider, wobbly steps growing steadier, voices finding their unique tones in a chorus that filled the house with music. "Look how the tabby one follows his mother's every move," Emma observed, maintaining a respectful distance that honored the invisible boundary between human care and feline independence. The family had learned the delicate art of presence without intrusion, of providing without overwhelming. Mr. Harrison maintained a meticulous schedule of fresh food, warm bedding, and the special supplements Dr. Miller had prescribed. The mother needs extra nutrition to nurse them properly, he would explain to anyone who called, his voice carrying the pride of someone entrusted with a sacred duty. Most remarkable was the transformation in the mother cat herself. The creature who had once trembled at human proximity now greeted Mrs. Harrison with a gentle headbutt against her palm when she approached with breakfast. The once wary eyes that had regarded them with suspicion now closed in contentment when Emma softly read aloud from her favorite books, as if the gentle cadence of her voice wove an additional layer of security around her vulnerable family. "She knows she's safe now," Dr. Miller remarked during her follow-up visit, watching as the mother cat stretched luxuriously on the blanket, exposing her belly in the ultimate display of trust. "That's not something a traumatized animal does unless they truly believe the danger has passed." In the quiet moments, when the household settled into evening calm, the purring of 6 contented creatures created a symphony of healing that seemed to mend not just their physical wounds, but something deeper in the very fabric of the home that had welcomed them from the storm. As winter's grasp softened into the first tentative whispers of spring, a remarkable transformation unfolded within the walls of the Harrison home. The kittens, once fragile threads of life, barely clinging to existence, now bounded across carpets and climbed furniture with the exuberant confidence of the truly secure. Each tiny being had blossomed into a distinct personality that added new dimensions to the household's daily rhythm. The tabby, dubbed Scout by Emma, had appointed himself explorer-in-chief, leading expeditions beneath sofas and into forgotten corners with bold determination. His sister, a delicate calico with mismatched eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom, preferred the quieter pursuit of sunbeam chasing, her tiny form creating perfect silhouettes against the living room floor. "Look at Midnight," Mr. Harrison chuckled as the jet-black kitten pounced on his shoelaces with fierce concentration. "He thinks he's a mighty hunter already." The smallest of the litter, a gray fluffball with oversized ears, had become Mrs. Harrison's devoted shadow, following her from room to room with unwavering devotion. Most profound was the metamorphosis of their mother. The frightened creature who had once cowered in corners now stretched languorously across the family sofa, her emerald eyes half closed in contentment as Emma gently stroked her healed fur. The scars remained, visible reminders of her past suffering, but they no longer defined her. When Mr. Harrison entered a room, she no longer tensed in anticipation of cruelty, but instead offered soft chirps of greeting. "She's letting love in," Mrs. Harrison observed one evening, watching as the mother cat allowed the entire family to gather around her precious babies without a hint of the former anxiety that had once governed her every moment. As the calendar pages turned and the kittens grew ever more enchanting, the conversation the family had been avoiding could no longer be postponed. Over dinner, the question hung in the air like a delicate crystal, fragile and impossible to ignore. "We need to find homes for them soon," Mr. Harrison said gently, his eyes meeting each family member's gaze in turn. "Good homes where they'll be cherished." Emma's hand found the mother cat's soft fur, fingers running along the healed line of an old scar. "But what if," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "what if the best home is already right here?" In the silence that followed, 6 pairs of feline eyes seemed to hold their collective breath, waiting for an answer that would determine the final chapter of their remarkable journey from darkness into light. The conversation that began at the dinner table continued long into the night, voices rising and falling like gentle waves against the shore of an inevitable conclusion. Mrs. Harrison made lists of practical considerations. Mr. Harrison calculated the financial implications, but Emma simply listened to the symphony of tiny purrs that filled their home with a harmony more persuasive than any logical argument. "Some things," she finally said in the quietest voice, "aren't meant to be divided." The next morning, as golden sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, Mr. Harrison made a single phone call that would change everything. "Dr. Miller, we've made our decision. All 6 of them. They're staying with us." What followed was a flurry of joyful preparation that transformed the Harrison home into a feline paradise. The spare room, once used for storage and occasional guests, became their dedicated sanctuary. Mr. Harrison spent an entire weekend constructing elegant climbing shelves that ascended the walls like a wooden stairway to heaven, while Emma and her mother arranged cozy beds at various heights, each uniquely suited to the preferences they had already learned. "Scout likes to be up high," Emma explained, placing his favorite blanket on the topmost platform. "But the little gray one, I'm calling her Whisper, she needs to be where she can see everyone." The family moved through their home with renewed purpose, seeing each space through the eyes of creatures who had known only hardship before finding sanctuary within these walls. Baby gates were installed, toxic plants removed, window perches positioned to catch the afternoon sun. Not a corner was overlooked, not a detail too small to consider in their mission to create the perfect forever home. On the evening when the renovation was complete, the family gathered in the newly christened cat room, watching as their expanded family explored their permanent kingdom. The mother cat, now officially named Grace, for all she had endured and overcome, moved from kitten to kitten, her tail held high in approval of their new territory. When she finally approached Mrs. Harrison, something miraculous happened. The purr that emerged from her healed body was not the tentative vibration of cautious acceptance they had grown accustomed to, but a full-throated song of unbridled joy that seemed to fill every corner of the room. "That," Mr. Harrison whispered, tears glistening in his eyes, "is the sound of someone who knows she's finally home." As seasons changed, and memories of that fateful storm faded into the gentle rhythm of everyday life, the Harrison family often found themselves pausing in quiet moments of reflection. They would watch as Grace groomed her growing kittens in pools of sunlight, her once wounded body now strong and sleek, and marvel at how profoundly their lives had been transformed by a single desperate creature who had appeared at their door. "Do you ever think about how easily we might have missed her?" Mrs. Harrison asked one evening, as they gathered in the living room where Grace and her babies had become the heart of their home. If Emma hadn't looked out the window at exactly that moment, the question hung in the air like a delicate cobweb, connecting each of them to a web of coincidences too perfect to be mere chance. The storm that had driven them inside that night, the backyard light that had illuminated a shadow, the decision to place that first bowl of food, 1,000 tiny choices that had culminated in a miracle. "I don't think it was accident," Emma said softly, her young face wise beyond her years as she gently stroked Whisper's delicate ears. "I think she found us because we needed her as much as she needed us." Mr. Harrison nodded, watching as Scout playfully wrestled with his siblings on the carpet. "Before they came, this house was just a place where we lived. Now it's something more." They had learned lessons that no classroom could teach, about patience in the face of fear, about the courage it takes to trust after betrayal, about how healing often comes in the form of helping others heal. Each tiny paw print had left an indelible mark on their hearts, changing not just their home, but how they moved through the world. As twilight descended and the first stars appeared in the velvet sky, the family settled into their evening routine. Grace, sensing the changing light, gathered her kittens with gentle nudges, guiding them to their favorite sleeping spot, a large wicker basket nestled in the corner where moonlight spilled through lace curtains. One by one, the kittens curled against their mother's warmth, tiny bodies fitting together like a perfect puzzle. Grace circled 3 times before settling, her emerald eyes finding each family member in turn, before slowly closing in the ultimate display of trust. In that perfect moment of communion between 2 species once separated by fear, the Harrisons witnessed the most profound truth of all, that sometimes the greatest act of kindness is simply opening your door to a stranger in need, never knowing how completely that single act might transform both their destiny and your own.